Hello, I'm Peter Okoche. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. As the number of confirmed coronavirus cases continues to rise, 4,500 Africans are still trapped in the Chinese city at the heart of the outbreak.
They're having to get their food delivered to them and, waiting for the universities to help them. And of course, some have run out of supplies.
No African nation has yet confirmed to plan to evacuate their nationals. We hear from one Kenyan student in Wuhan. After mounting pressure, Ethiopian authorities investigate the disappearance of students missing for almost 2 months. Also on the program, another bailout for South African Airways as it fights for survival. The state-owned airline will receive $250 million in the latest attempt to keep it in business. And in sports, Ivory Coast international Wilfred Bony is off to Saudi Arabia as he joins Al Ittihad. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The number of confirmed cases of coronavirus continues to grow. Just under 6,000 across China, and so far, 132 people have died. The focus for many countries now is to evacuate their citizens from Wuhan, the city where the outbreak began. Japan, Australia, and the US have begun airlifts, and more have plans in place. But what about Africans living across China? What are they hearing, from their government? Hannah Ryder is a former diplomat and an expert on Africans in China. She's based in Beijing. I began by asking her about the Africans in Wuhan and what they're doing there.
We estimate that there are around 4,600 students in Hubei province, which is the province which has Wuhan in it. The majority would be in Wuhan because that's where a large number of universities are, and that's where the Africans are mostly focused.
And do we know if any of their governments, because I understand from following you on social media that these students are from all over the continent: Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia. Do we know if their governments are talking to these students through their embassies in China?
Well, look, what the ambassadors have been saying to all of the students is please follow the local guidelines. Please follow what the local authorities are saying. And all of the students are complying with that. We've not heard of any cases where we've actually not even heard of any illnesses that the African students have had as yet. So we're hoping that they won't be affected. But they are, still in Wuhan. They're having to get their food delivered to them and, waiting for the universities to help them. And of course, some have run out of supplies, masks and so on. So the embassies do have to make a lot of effort. But the other thing to mention is there aren't any African embassies that have a consulate in Wuhan. There's only 4 countries that have consulates in Wuhan. That's France, the US, UK and South Korea. And so those countries are definitely much better placed to be helping their citizens. But for the African countries, they have to be working from Beijing. The other complication is that many of the ambassadors were also on holiday. This is a time when people take a long break in China. They will maybe take a break over Christmas and then continue to Chinese New Year, and especially since they were together. So a lot of the ambassadors were not even in the country when this crisis hit.
You are in Beijing, and where one death at least has been confirmed. What's life like for you there in Beijing today?
Well, I have a son, a 3.5-year-old son, so we've had to be inside, not just because of the virus, and in a way, being inside is not absolutely necessary. We just need to be wearing masks. But over the past few days, we've also had pollution, which has exacerbated everything. But thankfully, we were able to go out and about today. It's very, very quiet in Beijing. It usually is quiet. It's New Year. It's normally very quiet. People have left the city to go to their hometowns. But it is even more so now. And that said, we can still get all of our stock. We can still get vegetables and eggs and everything that we need in Beijing at the moment.
So what is life like in Wuhan, which has become a near ghost town? The city has been on lockdown since last Thursday without any notice of when movement in and out will be allowed again. Transport links have been cut, streets are largely empty. I spoke to Anthony, a PhD student from Kenya, who is stuck in his university accommodation.
Today, everything is at a standstill. It's calm, but it's at a standstill. Shops are closed, public transport is not available. So, also most of the shops are closed, and we have to remain within the boundaries of our school. So I cannot go outside my research institute. That's basically how things are for me today. Not only for today, but for quite some time, maybe in the past 1 week, I'm not allowed to leave the school compound.
How do you get your food if you need food or things that you need from the shops? How do you get them delivered to you?
So I think the institute has been quite helpful because they are sending someone to bring in the food. So once in a while, they are sending someone to bring in the supplies.
So how do you keep yourself engaged? What do you do to ward off the boredom?
Oh, well, being a PhD student, I wouldn't say I have time to be bored. And because in my institute, most of the students are postgraduate students. We don't have undergraduate students. Most of us are masters, PhD. So we got plenty to do in terms of personal research.
Let's talk about your interactions with the Kenyan government. Have you heard anything from them, any kind of advice? Do you know if there are plans for Kenya to come and evacuate its citizens from Wuhan, for instance?
Well, we have had engagement, but not so successful because there's an issue of non-commitment. The embassy staff is not committing itself fully. The responses we have gotten are so unofficial, and there hasn't been what I would call real official communication. It's quite informal. Just word of mouth, which cannot be taken as the real action that is expected to be taken.
Well, more countries across Africa have announced plans to screen passengers arriving from China, and we are still waiting to hear the results of the suspected cases in Kenya, Ethiopia and Ivory Coast. Today, Sudan said it was investigating one suspected case. In the last few minutes, Tanzania's national airline, Air Tanzania, has cancelled all its flights to China. The airline had planned to begin charter flights to China next month. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa. 15 people are reported to have been killed and 2 taken to hospital in the eastern Beni region of the DR Congo. Hundreds have been killed in militia violence since November, when the army began a crackdown on the armed group, the Allied Democratic Forces. The spate of attacks has become a major challenge for President Felix Tshisekedi, who took office a year ago. Authorities in Nigeria say an outbreak of Lassa fever has killed 41 people since the beginning of the month. The country's Center for Disease Control says there have been more than 250 cases of Lassa fever, which belongs to the same family as Ebola, but is less deadly. A deal between Egypt and Ethiopia and Sudan over the contentious Nile Renaissance Dam is expected to be penned later in Washington. Ethiopia reportedly agreed to fill the dam in stages during the rainy season and not all at once. Egypt relies on the river for 90% of its water supply. Let's go to South Africa now, where the cash-strapped state carrier, South African Airways, is set to receive yet another bailout. SAA is fighting for its survival after entering a form of bankruptcy protection in December. It then cancelled flights due to cash shortages. Now, $244 million of emergency funding is being pumped in from the government-owned Development Bank of Southern Africa. But will that be enough? Well, Matthew Davis is a BBC business presenter who's been following the story and joins me now. Matthew, why is the South African government seemingly throwing money after what seems to be a bad investment?
Well, Peter, if it wants to keep South African Airways flying, it needs to inject this money. And don't forget, what it's really looking for is an equity partner, a private firm, to come in and help them out. This is why the burden of all these bailouts has really fallen to the South African government themselves, and now through the Development Bank of Southern Africa.
Why is it important for it to keep South African Airways alive? This is a company that over the years has been losing money.
It hasn't made a profit in 11 years. So the problem is, of course, that there's of course the whole thing about having a prestigious flag carrier, that sort of thing. But what is really hit at the nub of this is jobs. South African Airways employs about just less than 6,000 people. Now, if it was to be liquidated, a lot of those jobs would be threatened. The unions won't handle that. And of course, the unions are in this tripartite alliance with the ruling ANC party in South Africa. So the ANC itself doesn't want to be seen as the party and the government who act so many jobs at a time when South Africa itself has 29% unemployment.
But we do know that, state-owned airlines on the continent have been notorious in the fact that they've done so badly. Many of them have been shut down. Aren't they taking a cue from those cases?
They are, but of course it does come back to these jobs, the laying off the jobs. Look, selling off South African Airways, a lot of people says that makes a lot of sense, not least the opposition Democratic Alliance. The company has 52 planes. It's already kind of put up 9 for sale. It has a lucrative, and actually some say a decent smaller airline in Mango, which is their kind of low-cost carrier, which it owns, and that could actually almost stand on its own. So there's a lot of arguments to say, yes, SAA should be liquidated and the various assets sold off. But then there's this thing about the jobs, the relationship that the shareholder, the ANC government, has with the unions, and the large unemployment figures in South Africa.
And this is a big if it were put up for sale, are there buyers interested in taking it off its hands?
Bits of it. They said recently that they were looking to sell off 9 of their old aircraft along with 15 spare engines. But of course, it's also this low-cost carrier Mango. They believe that, although we haven't seen the figures, but they believe that is much more profitable than SAA itself, and in itself represents a good asset and a good sale.
Matthew Davis, thanks a lot for your input into the story. Thank you very much. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwoche. Still to come on the program, Tanzanian football fans in Dar es Salaam were eagerly watching as their star striker Mbwana Samatta made his debut for Aston Villa. I'm Peter Okwoche. The top stories this hour. As the number of confirmed coronavirus cases continues to rise, 4,500 Africans are still trapped in the Chinese city at the heart of the outbreak. No African nation has yet confirmed a plan to evacuate their nationals, as Japanese and American citizens have now arrived home from Wuhan. More pressure is being put on the Tanzanian government to ensure free and fair general elections later this year. Last November, opposition parties boycotted local polls after most of their candidates were disqualified from standing. On Tuesday, the World Bank bowed to pressure and postponed a decision on the approval of a $500 million education loan to Tanzania. Activists claim the bank would be effectively endorsing the government's policy of banning pregnant girls from mainstream schools. Zito Kabwe is a member of parliament and is leading most of these campaigns. I asked him why.
We have a big problem of young girls who get pregnant and fail to continue with education. So normally they are supposed to go back to school so that they continue their career. And the World Bank and Tanzania agreed into something they called alternative pathway. That means turning these young girls into some sort of vocational education, to be cookers, to be cleaners and the likes. And we think that that's not right. We think that the young girls who get pregnant have the right to go back to school and get the education of their choice.
The number of girls who get pregnant at school age are in a minority.
Young girls who get pregnant go back to school. get education of their choice. And we don't support the discriminatory system that the World Bank and Tanzanian government want to put our girls into.
So there's also the argument that you are also seeking political gain, you know, as one of the leaders of the opposition by asking the World Bank to agree to hold back on this loan for the time.
This is risky for an opposition leader to take this risk of asking for suspension of a loan in education. Is very risky. So I don't see that we are taking a political gain. Actually, it's a brevity that cannot be done by anybody, but it is the right thing to do. And we are ready for the risk involved in it, to the consequences about it. It is the right thing to do. Education system should not be discriminatory. Young girls who get pregnant have the right to go back to school, to choose the education that they want without any discrimination.
You mentioned the general elections which are taking place in October this year.
Yeah.
When local elections were held last year in November, the opposition boycotted those elections. Will you be taking part in these general elections in October?
Ideally, yes. Ideally, we're prepared to participate in the general election. What happened in the civic election is really very disappointing. And we are so much worried that our country will be turned into a single-party state because the systematic blockade that the opposition candidates were put through in order to let CCM take over all the civic seats was an eye-opener.
That's Tanzanian MP Zitto Kabwe speaking to me earlier on today. Now, what happened to 21 university students who went missing in Ethiopia in the country's Amhara region? That's the puzzle the government says it is trying to solve. They were abducted more than 50 days ago by an unnamed armed group. Officials say some have been released, but locals challenge that. The BBC's Biswork Olana attended a government press conference in Addis Ababa today and sent this report.
Authorities in Ethiopia have revealed they are looking into the disappearance of several missing students who were kidnapped after a surge of violence at their university almost 2 months ago. This comes after mass demonstrations were held in northern Ethiopia on Tuesday, demanding the students to be found and returned home after they were abducted when they fled ethnic clashes at their university.
The government has established a workforce that is evaluating and investigating the case. This group has visited the area twice and delivered the information. So analysing and utilising the information and putting it into action would be the next step.
Many family members, friends and fellow students told the BBC they still haven't heard any news of the welfare or whereabouts of their loved ones.
I
don't know where to go. I am distraught. His mother could not take care of the other children after hearing what happened to him. I'm afraid of losing my other children too. He is just a little boy who doesn't even know the desert of his home.
This comes as supporters of the Oromo Liberation Front OLF were arrested across the Oromia region where 75 people were detained. The OLF is among several political groups which were reinstated by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed when he took office in April 2018. The continuing discontent comes as several towns remain under internet shutdown in a move the government says is part of security measures. All this is taking place as the country heads toward this election in August, which many will be watching keenly. Biswork Olana, BBC News, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
And you're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports. Mimi, what have you got for us today?
Wilfred Boney is actually the first story. He's been without a club since last summer, but now Saudi Arabian club Al Ittihad have announced the signing of Ivory Coast international Wilfred Boney on an 18-month deal. 31-year-old Boney is joining as a free agent. The former Manchester City striker hasn't played a competitive game since July when his Ivory Coast side were beaten on penalties in the quarterfinals of the Africa Cup of Nations. There's one English Premier League fixture to look out for today as Liverpool have travelled to London to face West Ham. The visitors are top of the table whilst the hosts are just above the relegation zone. Jurgen Klopp announced on Tuesday that Senegal international Sadio Mane will miss the tie due to an ankle issue that the forward picked up during the win against Wolves last week. All right, not long to go now until Aston Villa find out who they will be playing in the English Cup final. They will be facing either Manchester United or Manchester City at Wembley. The match kicks off in just over an hour's time. Aston Villa's manager, Dean Smith, said it was a goal made in Egypt as Egypt international Ahmed El Mohammadi provided the assist to his fellow countryman, Trezeguet, who had the winner. BBC Cairo, Mohamed Kudba explains what it means for the North African country.
The all-Egyptian goal in the Carabao Cup semi-final has grabbed the attention of many Egyptians, especially on social media. They were impressed by the way Villa Park reacted to that late goal scored by Mahmoud Trezeguet after Ahmed El Mohammadi crossed the ball to him on the far post, something Trezeguet said that he told Ahmed El Mohammadi to do it in Arabic so that the defenders couldn't notice that. And now that Liverpool are knocked out from the Carabao Cup, Egyptians will be rooting for Aston Villa in the final in Wembley. It's a prestigious moment to see two Egyptian players competing against either Manchester United or Manchester City in the final, and while they're waiting for Mo Salah in Liverpool to win the Premier League title after a long time, it's about time for Trezeguet to shine in English football, along with Ahmed El Mohammadi, who's been in England for quite a long time.
All right, and staying with Aston Villa, it wasn't just Egyptian fans who were celebrating their players on Tuesday. Tanzania also had something to celebrate. Their star striker and national team captain Mbwana Samata made his debut for Aston Villa in the game against Leicester City. He's the first Tanzanian to sign for the English Premier League side, so it's no surprise that hundreds of his fans back home in Dar es Salaam, as you can see on your screens, were watching him. Great shots over there. The Zimbabwe Football Association has named Croatian Zdravko Lukarusic as the new coach of the national team. The 54-year-old left as coach of Sudan in December when his contract was not renewed. He has signed a 2-year deal and will be assisted by Joey Antipas, who had been the Warriors' caretaker coach since August. And in cricket, still in Zimbabwe, where the second cricket test continues, Zimbabwe bowled Sri Lanka out for 293 and have just closed day 3 on 62 for 1 in their second innings, a lead of 175 runs. Peter, that's all the sport.
Maybe just before you go, you know, the match yesterday, Aston Villa's game, it was exciting for Tanzanians, but it was, a tale of two Egyptians.
I know before the match, everyone was talking about Mbwana Samata. Everyone was looking forward to him making his debut for Aston Villa. As we saw there, many Tanzanians were watching him, millions actually, across the country. But for the actual match, it was the Egyptians, as we mentioned, who were all the talking points after the game. Even said a goal made in Egypt because an assist from an Egyptian to another Egyptian, Trezeguet, who got the winner. So it's also exciting for Egyptians who will be watching the final in Wembley.
And, it was a great goal because I watched that goal as well. It was a great goal, beautiful cross there. But then, Samata also missed a great chance. I didn't want to mention that, but we have to.
We've got to give him time to warm up a bit. People need to be a bit patient with him.
Mimi, thank you very much. Thanks. All right. Now, just before we go, another look at our top story here on Focus on Africa. Several countries are evacuating their citizens from the city of Wuhan, which is at the center of the coronavirus outbreak. Some US and Japanese nationals were flown out on Wednesday. The number of confirmed cases of the respiratory virus has now reached 6,000. More than 130 people have died. African countries are monitoring the situation, but so far have not made any repatriation plans public. Speaking at a news conference in Geneva, the head of the World Health Organization said there's a possibility that the outbreak could become much larger. Now, don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm at Okwoche. But for now, from me, Peter Okwoche, and the rest of the team, that's it from Focus on Africa. Thanks for watching. See you again very soon.